Debian is a very important project. It is the basis for Ubuntu, and by extension, everything based on Ubuntu. It is powering probably, I would have to guess, a couple $2 billion worth of servers. Probably more. I don't think we know an accurate number on that. And the project is going through a little bit of a crisis. A crisis of being Debian. It's old, it's crusty, and it still needs people to help out with it. It is entirely, mostly volunteer run. There are people from Canonical that get paid to work on Ubuntu and upstream changes into Debian, so weird secondary effect there. But it still feels like working on something from the 90s, and not in the good way, in the kind of way where it's not really approachable for new maintainers to get involved. For instance, here is the Debian bug tracking system. So if you want to know how to report a bug, there is this page here, and you're probably wondering, why do I need to know how to report a bug? Shouldn't I just be able to report a bug? No, so to report a bug, there is the report bug tool. The reason why there is a tool called report bug is you report bugs and you reply to bug threads through email. And I don't mean that you have the option to use email if you want to use email, because you can do that on Bugzilla. I think you can do that on GitLab as well. I mean, you do it through email. That is your only option. And this was reported on by Phoronix back in January. Debian's bug track with no web UI for editing bugs is very obscure for 2026. You can view bugs in the web UI. That's all you can do with it though. So this was discussed by the maintainer and developer of Meson, who is also the maintainer of the Debian package. And obviously, this is his opinion, this is his stance as an individual Debian packager, but I still think this does hold a lot of weight. Using an email client to create or modify bug reports is not a bad idea per se. It's not. But using an email client as the only way of modifying bugs, which is how the Debian bug tracker works, is not only a bad idea, it is a terrible idea. To me, managing bugs is so awful that it is actively pushing me away from contributing to Debian. The bug statuses on Meson are not kept up to date because I prefer that to having to deal with the bug tracker. I suspect I am not alone in this. In any case, it is a major hurdle for new developers and might even cause some people to drop out entirely. It's one of those things which they've basically always done it like this, and for some projects like the Linux kernel, for example, you can get away with doing things like the LKML because it's so big, there's so many developers, it's not a problem. But if that momentum ever slows down, and that's kind of what's happening to Debian. Over the years, they've slowly been bleeding developers. They get some new developers and then lose some more. And it's at a point now where it doesn't have that excitement, that momentum, that people are willing to get involved with that. There's still some people, but it's slowing down every year. The Debian bug tracker was originally implemented in 1993, and back then, it was a pretty reasonable bug tracker. Doing everything over email was just the thing you did at the time. Having these web UIs, having various more convenient ways to do things just wasn't really the thing you did, right? This is 12 years before even Git. Obviously, there were other source control systems at the time, but this idea of having something like a GitHub, for example, that wasn't really a thing then. There might have been some like internal corporate applications, things like that, but nothing widespread. Sadly, the world changed completely. I'm going to say, thankfully, the world changed completely, but volunteers working on the bug tracker did not have the resources to update it. The end result is a classical legacy system, one that works, one that does what it needs to do, but which no new developer wants to touch. There is no web UI for manipulating bug data. Instead, you write an email in a custom format. That's why there is that report bug tool, so you can actually easily put it in that format, send that to a specific email address, and wait for things to happen, and hopefully you structured it correctly. The main problem here is not the format, it's the fact that the user has to do the thing that the computer should be doing for you. Every time you need to manipulate bugs, you need to open the documentation page to remind yourself what the actual syntax is. A program would get it right automatically every time. Get it wrong, sucks to be you. A program would get it right automatically every time. Send it to the wrong email address, sucks to be you. And the person whose bug you just altered, a computer program, would get it right every time. And so on. And it's annoying. Now, a question you might have. How does security work? It doesn't. It actually doesn't. The only reason the Debian bug tracker hasn't been vandalized is no one's felt to do it. If you send the correctly crafted email to the correct location, you can just destroy everything. There is an actual term for this approach. Security through obscurity. The fact that the main bug tracker of the OS that runs the world does not have strict authentication in place does not fill me with the warm fuzzies. I'm honestly impressed with how little vandalism, how little spam there has been. There has been some, not as much as you would probably expect though. If you're an old greybeard, if this is a system you've worked with for the past, 30 years now, you're probably fine with it. But the more time passes, the less enticing it becomes to learn a very custom system for this one project. Because let's think of it like this. Let's say you're an excited new developer and you want to get involved in a Linux distro. So you have Debian over here. Debian does everything through email and it's kind of this weird format. And it's this weird thing that you're going to have to learn specifically for working on Debian. And then there's something like, Arch Linux over here. They migrated over to doing all of their package management through GitLab. They do some things through a mailing list, but they have other things like an IRC as well. And even a mailing list, right, is something that other projects still use. So you can learn specific skills for this one project over here, or learn transferable skills for this other project, and then if you want to move to something else, you don't need to relearn everything. It's very easy to see why the other project is more enticing for a new developer. And this isn't a unique problem that is just being brought up now. Here we have a report from 2000, December 1st, 2000, about adding a web front end to their bug tracking system. So this has been known for such a long time, but they haven't migrated to anything. Even a Bugzilla at this point would be better. It's just, now that it's been around for so long, doing a migration is so much work because you don't want to lose all of that bug tracking history. So do you say, okay, we're not going to migrate things, but we're going to have an archive of the older stuff, but then what about bugs that are still being worked on that haven't been resolved? Okay, we have to migrate those, but how do we identify which ones we do want to migrate and which ones we don't want to migrate? So the more time that passes, the more this becomes just an impossible nightmare to do. If this was done in 2005, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. If it was done in 2000, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But at this point, there is so much history here that you need a lot of work to do it, and nobody wants to do the work. And more recently than this, there was another problem, a call for volunteers for their data protection team. This is basically the GDPR compliance team. Now, when you're a corpo, filling that role, it's going to cost you some money, but it's easy enough. Finding someone to deal with that nonsense, you can do it. When you're a volunteer-driven project, finding someone who wants to spend their days dealing with GDPR compliance issues for free, that's a little bit harder. So much so that they had their 3 delegated members all step down from the task at basically the same time. Now, obviously, Debian's volunteer-driven project, and someone needs to fill this role, but it's not a fun role. This isn't like developing something cool, maintaining packages, anything like that. This is just boring corpo nonsense. And if you want to do boring corpo nonsense, I'd rather get paid for it. The fact that all team members have stepped back at the same time should make it clear that we urgently need new volunteers to fulfill this role. Despite a constructive discussion at DevConf this year, no one has come forward to join the data protection team, and as of the recording of this, I believe they still have no dedicated members. Yeah. The existing team have all resigned. This means that currently any data protection inquiries come to the Debian project leader, who already has other things to do, so they probably don't get dealt with in a timely manner. Basically, anyone who is willing or qualified to do this role is just going to go and get a job doing this role, right? We don't have a shortage of developers in the FOSS space. We have a lot of designers nowadays. That's also less of an issue. But people that want to do the boring corpo nonsense, like, it was still a bit of a problem. Frankly, this is an area where I do think Canonical probably should help them out and just pay someone to do it. Because they're going to have their people that deal with GDPR stuff. Even though Canonical's in the UK, they still need to deal with GDPR because they have people, you know, in Europe that are doing things, so that still needs to be there. That would probably be the best way to handle this. I don't know why that hasn't been done. I don't know if there has been discussions. But right now, whoever ends up being the project leader next is probably still going to have to deal with this role. And you know what? I'm kind of surprised they had anyone doing the role in the first place. Probably whoever suggested the data protection team ended up stepping up into the role. That's, I'm assuming, what happened here. Going even more recent than this, the current Debian project leader, Andreas Till, has taken note of the issue of Debian maintainers leaving. And the general lack of maintainers, not just leaving, but vanishing. Leaving the project without passing the torch to anyone. Just one day saying, you know what, I'm done here, leaves, and then whatever they were working on is just now unmaintained. This was discussed on the Debian mailing list. Bits from the DPL, the Debian project leader. There's a lot here. I'm not going to read everything, but I will leave the entire email linked down below. Changes around FTP/DFSG structures. Over an extended period of time, it became clear that essential work in this area was carried by very few people. This affected day-to-day processing as well as transparency, predictability, and communication. Situations like this are unfortunately not uncommon in Debian and can arise not from bad faith, but from long-grown structures, increasing workload, and limited opportunities to address problems early. Ahead of the recent changes starting my first DPL term, I made several attempts to engage with the relevant delegates and to solicit feedback. These efforts did not lead to sufficient shared understanding to develop a sustainable path forward. Under these circumstances, organizational decisions were necessary to ensure continued functionality in an area that is foundational to Debian. I want to stress that this reorganization is not a judgment of the work or commitment of individuals. Much of what works today is the result of years of dedicated effort, often under difficult conditions. At the same time, as a project, we need structures that contribute responsibility sustainably and support transparency, collaboration, and renewal. I therefore ask everyone to view the current situation not as old versus new, but as a necessary step towards a Debian that remains reliable, open about challenges, and mindful of the people doing the work. This was a follow-up from a prior discussion, Now What, on FTP Master Division into Archive Ops and DFSG team. Over the last month, community team has recognized increasing concern among the community about the ongoing process to change responsibilities over the Debian archive driven by Debian project leader Andreas Till. For almost 2 decades now, the FTP Master delegates and their team carried an enormous responsibility in our project, maintaining the availability and security of Debian's critical package archive and diligently reviewing each and every new package that enters Debian. In short, they've been ensuring stability for the foundation Debian is built upon. At the same time, several consecutive Debian project leaders, as well as many project delegates, have observed the FTP team has been facing increasing challenges in some important aspects of their responsibilities. Recruiting, as well as retaining new members, keeping the project as a whole informed of their activities, being open to the project input in order to adapt to a changing world. That state of affairs ultimately led to one team member carrying the vast majority of the team's ongoing package review workload. About 97% was done by a single person. If you want to talk about a bus factor, that right there is a bus factor. What happens if that person steps away from the project? What happens if something happens to them? This entire system collapses. Now let's go to the main thing I want to talk about when stepping back goes unspoken. When people just leave the project and that's it. During my time as DPL, an earlier gut feeling has gradually turned into a clearer observation. Debian has a structural challenge that is easy to overlook precisely because it is a volunteer project. Debian exists because people freely choose to spend their time on it. That is something I deeply value. At the same time, most of us joined with enthusiasm, not with an explicit agreement to later announce when our available time, energy, or interest change. Life circumstances shift, priorities involved, interests fade. All of this is normal and entirely legitimate. What we largely lack, however, are lightweight and reliable ways to communicate those changes to each other. If you're done with the project and you don't want to deal with things anymore, do you want to go and, send an email to the mailing list to announce things and then you're just like, I'm done with this project? That's a lot of effort for something that you don't want to be involved in anymore. Then if you're maintaining some packages, you need to find people to maintain those packages for you or maybe train people up to do it. And all of this is being done as a volunteer for something that you aren't interested in doing anymore. For many volunteers, being asked directly whether they're still active or whether others can rely on their work can feel uncomfortable, especially when the question comes from a friend or colleague. Out of consideration for each other, we often avoid asking. There are so many problems that we dealt with by just simply talking to each other, and this is one of them. Out of the same consideration, we also avoid proactively stating that we have stepped back. As a result, responsibilities can quickly drift rather than being consciously handed over or concluded. This dynamic creates a kind of implicit protection for contributors, which is understandable and well-intentioned. At the same time, it can have real consequences for the project. Bugs remain unattended, security-relevant accounts are left without active oversight, or delegated roles continue to exist on paper without clear current ownership. This is not about questioning anyone's commitment or goodwill. It is about recognizing that in a long-running volunteer project, availability changes, and that Debian currently has few established ways to make the changes visible in a timely and low-pressure manner. He further goes into processes they can adopt to potentially maybe address this. If you want to go read these for yourself, again, I will leave this linked down below, but we're going to skip past that. The challenge is not inactivity itself, but situations where useful work becomes difficult or impossible because the only clear ownership indicator points to someone who is no longer responding. So there might be some work that somebody is interested in doing, but the maintainer on paper, well, they're not around. So you think they're around because it says they're the maintainer, and then nobody can get involved because nobody can contact the maintainer. While the MIA team focuses on inactivity at the account and project level, this section looks at how similar dynamics affect day-to-day package collaboration. Over time, this silence creates uncertainty. Whilst these are problems being raised by Andreas Till, this is not the first Debian project leader to identify that these are problems that do exist. This is an issue that Debian has been facing for a very long time. Debian isn't a project that's just going to die overnight. It's a project that has been slowly over time losing maintainers and slowly but surely heading towards that point of irrelevancy. And that's really bad because a lot of things rely on Debian. But Debian is still stuck in a place where nobody is really that interested in getting involved with it, and less people are running Debian itself because people realize that running 2-year-old out-of-date packages is not really a great user experience, so people have migrated to other systems, get involved in those distros, and that leaves Debian in this weird state where they need people to upgrade their systems into newer systems that people want to work on, but there's nobody around that wants to upgrade these systems into systems people want to work on. So it's this eternal loop of people just wanting things to be solved, but nobody being able to solve it with the amount of work they have available already and the number of people that are willing to do things. Debian isn't going away anytime soon, but I don't think this is a problem that's gonna get better anytime soon either. Hopefully by raising some alarm about this, with the Debian project leader talking about this, me talking about this, Phronix has done some articles, maybe something can change, but I just don't really see how you change it without fundamentally changing the infrastructure that Debian has available to maintainers. And how do you make that change without bothering the long-term maintainers, who are basically the only reason the project is still going? So, what are your thoughts? Debian is obviously in this weird state, and you don't really hear people talking about Debian much on the desktop anymore, right? People talk about Fedora, they talk about Arch, they talk about all of these other things. Debian obviously gets its mentions in the server space, but with how much is relying on Debian, you would think that more companies would get directly involved in the project, right? It's such a core infrastructure piece, but there's not really much of that. Like, they get some of it, sure, but you would think Debian would be an incredibly well-funded project, but somehow it's not. I don't know. I wish I knew. Anyway, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe. If you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Stanley Therapy, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and we'll see where we are in, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Something.